Hi, welcome to Talking and Reading from Japan. I'm your host, Hidemi Woods. I read an episode from one of the books I wrote here and talk about it or talk about anything that pops up in my mind. I hope you enjoy with me. Today, I'm gonna read an episode in my book titled An Old Tree in Kyoto. Today's episode is called My Grandfather's Party. It's about home parties my late grandfather held. My grandfather's party. My grandfather liked a party so much. He threw it almost every week at home when I lived with him in my hometown. As he had held the chair of a local senior citizen society and a local chrysanthemum association after he retired, those parties weren't so small, with about 20 old people gathering each time. They weren't official parties, but his home parties solely for his own fun. He made my grandmother order catering and serve sake and beer, all with our family's money. It was a big nuisance to other members of our family, but no one complained to him, who was a dictator in the family. I used to feel disgusted when I came home from school and saw revelries in my home. One good thing about it was there was an occasional absentee or two if I was lucky. In that case, my grandmother would let me have a surplus dish, and I got an unexpected feast. Sometimes, though, an absentee turned out to be just a latecomer, and my feast had to be aborted after only one bite. At one party, a man who was quite old drank too much and became unconscious in a chair. My grandfather called an ambulance and the man died at the hospital. Although my grandparents insisted he didn't die in our house but died a natural death at the hospital, a big stain of his urine on the chair didn't come off. The chair had been my grandmother's favorite chair that she used when she did some sewing, but she never sat in it again. Also, my grandfather's home party days were over. He never had a party for his clubs at home again. We retrieved quiet days to our house in a weird way. But I missed the delicious excess dish once in a while. That was today's episode. My grandfather was, I lived with him all my life in my hometown until I was 21 years old. And I was raised by my grandparents, so we were quite close, but not in a friendly way. My grandfather held tight rein over my family members. So my grandparents and my parents and my sister and I lived together under one big roof, but the rest of, except for under my grandfather's reign, the rest of us lived in a really we crunched, we really felt so in a way scared of him every day, and we just we were like servants of his. And so he was a head of the family, and to us he seemed to be a dictator, and we were all afraid of him, and we always tried to please him, like servants try to do for a king or something. And my grandfather was a man of egotism. He always tried to center himself over anything, and he just a person of me, I type of person. So it wasn't easy to live with him. And but he did everything in his own way, and the rest of the family just followed his way, even though we hated it. We couldn't tell anything to him. We just silently, quietly followed him, his way. And so living with him caused numerous problems and troubles in the house, such as when every time we have dinner, we used to have dinner together, 6 of us. The only person who talked in the dinner time on the table was my grandfather. The rest of us were just listening to him. And for your information, what he was talking was so boring and not interesting at all. So the mealtime was a torture in a way. And sometimes I dared. No one didn't, but I dared to talk about myself. Like, today at school, my friend told me like that. I goes that way. Then every single time my grandfather interrupts me and like going like this. School, I tell you, when I went to school, when I was a student, my teacher told me once, blah, blah, blah. So he just snatched my story, what I was going to tell, and just stole it into his story. And no matter how hard I tried, I couldn't deter his interruption. He just switched my talking into his talking. And he just talked and talked and talked, and those stories of his were all familiar to us. We had heard of it millions of times, but he talked as if it were the first time he introduced his experience to the rest of the family. And he talked about his stories so happily, merrily. He enjoyed immensely talking about himself. And we sat and pretended to listen to him, just eating, just waiting for this mealtime to end, because we couldn't stand his talking, his boring talking about himself. And so he really liked talking, and when he held those parties of his clubs, he usually gave the guests a speech, even though a speech wasn't required. They didn't need any speech because it was not official parties. Nobody asked his speech, but he made a speech anyway because he liked it. Or I think he threw those parties just to give them a speech. A speech was his main purpose, to throw a party. He liked a speech that much. And the guests were quietly listening to him. And I know that, like myself, they were just waiting for his speech to end. And what they were thinking was to start eating the treat as soon as possible. So they just wished that my grandfather's speech would be short, which usually wasn't for them. And my grandfather enjoyed those parties because those parties were his chance to speak, to give a speech in front of the guests. And but that unfortunate incident in which an old guest drank too much and died at the hospital, that must have been a shocking experience for his grandfather, because he suspended his party days because of that incident. And I was so relieved. But I think he was waiting for his shock to disappear. And in his mind, he was waiting for his party days to resume. But while he was suspending his parties, it's about a few years, 5 or 6 years later, those club staff came to my house and asked my father to step down from the position of the head of the club. He was asked to step down from the head of the Chrysanthemum Association, and also from the head of the local senior citizen club. And my grandfather got furious. What kind of request it was, he yelled to those people who asked and came to my house. And my father repeatedly told them that he didn't understand the reason why he had to step down. He wanted to continue. But the men who came to my house to ask my grandfather were bowing again and again, just begged my grandfather to quit. And how dare you, my grandfather told them. But it seemed there were it seemed that my grandfather had didn't have much choice, so he really reluctantly had to leave his positions. So his party never resumed, and he passed away. I surely feel that he wanted to continue his parties, and he really wanted to give a speech to his audience. But those days, unfortunately, didn't come back to him, and he passed away. What I think is that he is throwing his parties above, up in heaven, I guess. And I certainly think he's speaking in front of people that about his experiences when he was alive, he was in this world. So his party days are still going on up above. That was what I feel quite sure about my grandfather. And as I introduced in my books, episodes about my grandfather are abundant. I wrote about my grandfather so much, quite many episodes in my books are about my grandfather. So instead of my grandfather, I am talking about his experiences down here while he's doing up there. It's funny. Things goes unexpected way, don't you think? Well, that's all for today. Thanks for listening. I'm Hidemi Woods. I hope I can talk to you soon again here. Until next time, take care and be well.